Day 612, Tuesday, February 25th, Ezekiel 8, Ezekiel 8, 1-18 NKJV. And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I sat in my house with the elders of Judah sitting before me, that the hand of the Lord God fell upon me there. Then I looked, and there was a likeness, like the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his waist and downward fire, and from his waist and upward, like the appearance of brightness, like the color of amber. He stretched out the form of a hand, and took me by a lock of my hair, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and brought me in visions of God to Jerusalem, to the door of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the image of jealousy was, which provokes to jealousy. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was there, like the vision that I saw in the plain. Then he said to me, Son of man, lift your eyes now toward the north. So I lifted my eyes toward the north, and there, north of the altar gate, was this image of jealousy in the entrance. Furthermore he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, to make me go far away from my sanctuary? Now turn again, you will see greater abominations. So he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, there was a hole in the wall. Then he said to me, Son of man, dig into the wall. And when I dug into the wall, there was a door. And he said to me, Go in, and see the wicked abominations which they are doing there. So I went in and saw, and there, every sort of creeping thing, abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel, portrayed all around on the walls. And there stood before them 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel, and in their midst stood Jaazaniah the son of Shaphan. Each man had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. Then he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? For they say, The Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land. And he said to me, Turn again, and you will see greater abominations that they are doing. So he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Then he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, you will see greater abominations than these. So he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and there, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, and they were worshipping the sun toward the east. And he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, then they have returned to provoke me to anger. Indeed, they put the branch to their nose. Therefore I also will act in fury. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them. Daily Deep Dive, the UCG reading plan states, Ezekiel 8-11 records the details of another powerful vision the prophet received from God. The date is a year and 2 months after the first vision. Compare Ezekiel 1:1-2, Ezekiel 3:15-16, Ezekiel 8:1. This would seem to place it within the 40-day period during which Ezekiel lay on his right side to represent the punishment for Judah's sins, following the 390 days on his left side for Israel. Compare Ezekiel 4:4-8. However, it should be noted that, as sometimes happens with the Hebrew calendar, it is possible that a 13th month had been added to the year, which would mean that the vision of chapters 8-11 occurred just after the 40-day period. As chapter 8 opens, we find Ezekiel sitting in his house with the elders of Judah, leaders among the Jewish exiles in Babylon, in audience to hear what he has to say. No doubt his lengthy mock siege had attracted a great deal of attention. Once again, Ezekiel experiences virtual reality by seeing and experiencing in his mind what the others in the room do not. He sees the same glorious figure he beheld in the first vision, that of the Lord. Verse 2. Compare Ezekiel 1:26-28, the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. Compare Revelation 1:12-15. The Lord carries the prophet, who is also a priest, in vision to Jerusalem, to the northern gate of the temple. The north gate was also called the altar gate, apparently because sacrifices were killed in its vicinity, on the north side of the altar. Compare Leviticus 1:11. Compare Ezekiel 40:35-43. Ezekiel sees the glory of God. Ezekiel 8:4. The cascading illuminations surrounding God's presence, as he had witnessed in chapter. That glory was here at the temple, as were the 4 transporting cherubim, as we will see in the next few chapters. Yet, as we will also see, God's glory will soon depart from the sanctuary. Abominations committed here are causing him to withdraw his presence. Ezekiel is taken on a tour of the temple area to witness the terrible abominations. He first is told to look around where he has landed in this vision, in the vicinity of the north gate near the place of sacrifice, where a vile image is now located, perhaps implying that sacrifices are made to it. The image is referred to as the image of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy. Verse 3. This probably harkens back to God's commands against idolatry. You shall not make yourself a carved image, to bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. You shall destroy there the Canaanites' altars, break their sacred pillars and cut down their wooden images, for you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Exodus 20:45, Ezekiel 34:13-14. Israel is God's wife by covenant, and he is rightly jealous over her loyalty and affections, demanding that she not enter into adulterous relations with other gods, adopting their worship customs. Of course, being provoked to jealousy essentially means being provoked to justified anger, which may be why the Jewish Tanakh translation renders verse 3 as saying, "That was the sight of the infuriating image that provokes fury." The Revised English Bible has "where stands the idolatrous image which arouses God's indignation." There are different ideas as to what this image was. Some propose an image of Tammuz, the counterfeit savior of the Chaldean religion, since his worship is specifically mentioned in the chapter as occurring in the same place, Ezekiel 8:14. Surprisingly, the image could have been that of a large cross. As Vine's Expository Dictionary of Old and New Testament Words explains, the modern cross had its origin in ancient Chaldea, and was used as the symbol of the god Tammuz, being in the shape of the mystic Tau, the initial of his name in that country, and in adjacent lands including Egypt. By the middle of the 3rd cent. AD, the churches had either departed from, or had travestied certain doctrines of the Christian faith. In order to increase the prestige of the apostate ecclesiastical system, pagans were received into the churches apart from regeneration by faith, and were permitted to retain their pagan signs and symbols. Hence the Tau or T, in its most frequent form, with the cross piece lowered, was adopted to stand for the cross of Christ, cross crucify, New Testament section 1985. Most scholars, however, feel the image was an Asherah, the Hebrew term for a sacred wooden image or tree. The reason for this conclusion is because Manasseh even set a carved image of Asherah that he had made in the temple of God, and he has acted more wickedly than all the Amorites who were before him, and has made Judah sin with his idols. 2 Kings 21:7-11, NKJ. Even though Josiah purged Judah of idolatry during his reign, the hearts of the people reverted back to Manasseh's evil after Josiah's death, which means the priests may have been inclined to reproduce Manasseh's image. Either way, since the corrupted Jewish worship was often syncretistic, blending true and false worship, it could well be that the idolatrous object, whatever its form may have been, was being used to worship the true God, which he had strictly forbidden. Next, Ezekiel was brought into the north entry gate. There he saw a hole in the wall and was told to dig through the wall, enter and observe what the elders of Israel were doing secretly in the inner court, or, perhaps more accurately, in chambers or a particular chamber adjacent to the north gate. VV 7-9. These 70 elders were not the Sanhedrin of New Testament times. That institution had not yet begun. They were most likely the leaders of the nation who based their traditional position on Moses' appointment of the 70 elders to assist him in governing God's people. Exodus 24:1, Exodus 24:9, Numbers 11:16-25. Expositor's Bible Commentary, note on Ezekiel 8:7-9. Note that these are referred to as the elders of the house of Israel. Verse 12. The expression house of Israel sometimes includes Judah, especially as Judah was supposed to be the faithful remnant of Israel. That Judah of Ezekiel's day is intended is clear from the mention of Jazaniah the son of Shaphan, as Shaphan had been Josiah's secretary of state, and his other sons, such as Jeremiah's friend Ahikam, came to occupy important positions. See 2 Kings 22:8-14, 2 Chronicles 34:15-21, Jeremiah 2, Jeremiah 29:3, Jeremiah 6:10, Jeremiah 45, Jeremiah 49, Jeremiah 0:11, Jeremiah 41, Jeremiah 43:6. Moreover, the phrase house of Judah is explicitly used in Ezekiel 8:17. Yet it may be that in this vision the 70 elders are also meant to typify, in a broader spiritual sense, the religious leadership of all Israel in a future context, particularly as we will later see other indications that the vision of chapters 8-11 applies to both Israel and Judah in the end time. See Ezekiel 9:9, Ezekiel 11:15, Ezekiel 11:17-21. In verses 10-11 of chapter 8, Ezekiel describes the portrayal of idolatrous images on the walls where he has entered, with the elders shockingly standing before them as priests with censers. In verse 12 it appears that the honoring of idols is even done privately in the elders' chambers, showing this to be their personal conviction. This seems fairly straightforward, and yet the meaning may be broader. While pagan images may have literally been used to adorn the temple complex or its chambers in Ezekiel's time, as they certainly did at earlier times, it is possible that the vision should be understood, at least on some level, in a figurative sense. Perhaps the indication is that the nation's leaders, while practicing what appears to be a form of true worship, are really devoted to false gods and customs of false worship. Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown's commentary states that the elders are here the representatives of the people, rather than to be regarded literally. Mostly the leaders of heathen superstitions laughed at them secretly, while publicly professing them in order to keep the people in subjection. Here what is meant is that the people generally addicted themselves to secret idolatry, led on by their elders. There is no doubt also allusion to the mysteries, as in the worship of Isis in Egypt, the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, etc., to which the initiated were alone admitted. Note on verse 12, such a figurative meaning would apply in the nations of Israel and Judah even today, its leaders and people having rejected true worship for a false Christianity, descended in many respects from the Babylonian mystery religion. Called in Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon the Great. Indeed, as God's temple in New Testament times is His church, see Ephesians 2:19-22, 2 Corinthians 6:16, compare Ezekiel 11:16, the true Israel of God, Galatians 6:16. Ezekiel's vision here may even picture, in type, the great apostasy from the truth foretold by the Apostle Paul, compare 2 Thessalonians 2:3. The elders are pictured as saying, "The Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land," Ezekiel 8:12. When Ezekiel received this vision, Judah had experienced drought and a series of invasions, King Jeconiah and many people having been dragged away to Babylon. So the leaders reasoned, God had deserted the land and the people, what did they have to lose? In the next chapter these words are attributed to both Israel and Judah. 9. So the same false reasoning will be employed in the future as national calamities begin to worsen. How ironic that such reasoning itself eventually leads to even greater calamity. Verse 10. Also ironic is that the name of Jazaniah, the person singled out, means, the Eternal hears, or the Eternal hearkens, implying that God does indeed hear and see whatever is going on and reacts. Ezekiel is next directed to see the terrible abomination of women at the temple weeping for Tammuz. Ezekiel 8:14. The Encyclopedia Mythica says Tammuz was the Akkadian vegetation god, counterpart of the Sumerian Dumuzi and the symbol of death and rebirth in nature. He is the husband of Ishtar. Each year he dies in the hot summer in the month Tammuz, June, July, and his soul is taken by the Galu demons to the underworld. Woe and desolation fall upon the earth, in the form of withering vegetation in autumn and winter, and Ishtar leads the world in lamentation, i.e. the weeping for Tammuz. She then descends to the netherworld, and after many trials succeeds in bringing him back, as a result of which fertility and joy return to the earth in the spring. In Syria he was identified with Adonis. As was explained in the Beyond Today Bible commentary on Isaiah 47, the myth of Ishtar and Tammuz may be traced back to the early Babylonian queen Semiramis, wife of Nimrod, the builder of Babel. See Genesis 10:8-10. After Nimrod's death, Semiramis's Ishtar produced a child through fornication, Tammuz, yet claimed that he was the very incarnation and resurrection of her dead husband, now reborn to life. Recalling that the symbol for Tammuz was the cross, the idea of the women of Ezekiel's vision weeping before his symbol, which may have been the image of jealousy mentioned earlier, mourning his death and awaiting his resurrection, is disturbingly similar to some of what we see today that goes by the name of Christianity. Indeed, the ancient idea of a dying and resurrected saving God has led some to conclude that even the notions of Christ dying for our sins and being raised from the dead derived from paganism. Yet we should understand that though it was concocted by Semiramis, the worship of Tammuz, the fountainhead of the world's idolatry, sprang from Satan, who deceives the whole world. Revelation 12:9. In his inimical deceit, Satan, through this ancient Babylonian religion, counterfeited certain aspects of the imagery of Christ's later execution to subvert and pervert Christianity for some, and utterly discredit it for others. On the subversion and perversion side, he has succeeded in convincing most of the world that many of the concepts and practices of his counterfeit religion belong in true Christian worship. For more details, request or download our free booklet Holidays or Holy Days. Does it matter which days we observe? It has been suggested by some scholars that the practice of weeping for Tammuz was the actual origin of Lent, the Roman Catholic 40-day period of abstinence prior to Easter, starting after Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, on Ash Wednesday. Consider that the name Easter itself is derived from Ishtar, the ancient Babylonian fertility goddess and Tammuz's mother. Alexander Hislop, in his book The Two Babylons, explains that the 40 days abstinence of Lent was directly borrowed from the worshippers of the Babylonian goddess. Such a Lent of 40 days, in the spring of the year, is still observed by the Yazidis or pagan devil worshippers of Kurdistan, who have inherited it from their early masters, the Babylonians. Such a Lent of 40 days was held in spring by the pagan Mexicans. 3 days after the vernal equinox began, a solemn fast of 40 days in honor of the sun. Such a Lent of 40 days was observed in Egypt. Among the pagans, this Lent seems to have been an indispensable preliminary to the great annual festival in commemoration of the death and resurrection of Tammuz, which was celebrated by alternate weeping and rejoicing, and which in many countries was considerably later than the Christian festival, being observed in Palestine and Assyria in June, therefore called the month of Tammuz, in Egypt about the middle of May, and in Britain sometime in April. To conciliate the pagans to nominal Christianity, Rome, pursuing its usual policy, took measures to get the Christian and pagan festivals amalgamated, and, by a complicated but skillful adjustment of the calendar, it was found no difficult matter in general to get paganism and Christianity, now far sunk in idolatry, in this as in so many other things, to shake hands. 1959 pp 104-105. The month of Tammuz was the 4th month on the Hebrew calendar. Lent today overlaps the last month of the Hebrew year and ends in the first month. It is interesting to consider that the Celtic Britons who centuries ago observed the mourning period more in line with the time Lent is observed today, were Israelites. Perhaps they had begun this practice while still in the Promised Land, as the apostate Jews may have also done. Either way, whether 4th month or 1st, we should notice that Ezekiel's vision takes place in the 6th month, Ezekiel 8:1. Though that might appear problematic, this may just signify the time Ezekiel received the vision, not the time the events depicted in it actually occurred. Indeed, Ezekiel's vision appears in many respects to be symbolic. Even if literal, we should not necessarily conclude that he was seeing things at the temple the very moment they were transpiring. His vision may have been more sweeping in scope, just as many other prophets had visions in a short time of events that would span days, months, or even years in their actual fulfillment. Ezekiel is then taken from the vicinity of the north gate to the court area outside of the holy place. He is here presented with another stunning sight, men with their backs to God's temple, worshipping the sun toward the east. Verse 16. The location for the sun worship was in the inner court between the porch and the altar. These 25 men must have been Levites if temple regulations were being followed otherwise. The area was forbidden. See Numbers 3:7-8, Numbers 18:1-7, 2 Chr. 4:9, Joel 2:17. Nelson Study Bible, note on Ezekiel 8:15-16. Indeed, this group appears distinct from the 70 image-worshipping elders mentioned previously. It would seem strange that only a portion of the 70 would have been engaged in the sun worship. The specific numbers of 70 verse 11 and 25 verses 16 were probably given to aid in distinguishing the two groups. Therefore, it is more likely that these 25 men were priests, though one cannot be dogmatic about it. If they were priests, perhaps the number is 25 because there was a representative of each of the 24 courses of the priest plus the high priest cf. 1 Chron 23. Expositors, note on Ezekiel 8:16. Perhaps the symbolism is to demonstrate that both the civil and religious leadership were engaged in pagan practices, and maybe to show that the same would be true in the end time. It should also be noted that chapter 11 mentions 25 princes giving wicked counsel, with another person named Jazaniah among them, albeit a different Jazaniah. In Ezekiel 8:16, since the sun was in the east, this logically denotes sunrise, a popular in-between moment for sun worship. In the pagan world, consider, as quoted above, the solemn fast of 40 days in honor of the sun. Tammuz was often equated with Baal, and Baal often with the sun. Coming right on the heels of the previous verses, it could well be that what Ezekiel was witnessing was the conclusion of the pagan Lenten season, when Ishtar, or Easter, was deemed to have brought Tammuz here as the incarnate sun back from the underworld in a resurrection in the spring, specifically on the feast of Ishtar known today as Easter. This then would have essentially been Easter sunrise services, so extremely popular today in the world religion, that masquerades as Christianity, and yet an utterly vile abomination according to God. Indeed, this symbolism is profound. The worshippers, religious leaders even, turned their backs on God in order to participate, and yet they probably claim to be honoring the true God, as they still do. What audacity! Rejection of true worship has resulted in violence throughout the land. Ezekiel 8:17, bloodshed. The next chapter explains, 9:9. As for putting the branch to their nose, verse 17, the meaning is uncertain. Matthew Henry's commentary states, a proverbial expression denoting perhaps their scoffing at God and having him in derision, they snuffed at his service, as men do when they put a branch to their nose. Or it was some custom used by idolaters in honor of the idols they served. We read of garlands used in their idolatrous worships, Acts 14:13, out of which every zealot took a branch which they smelled to as a nosegay. Dr. Lightfoot Hor-Heb, in John 15:6, gives another sense of this place. They put the branch to their wrath, or to his wrath, as the Masoretes read it. That is, they are still bringing more fuel, such as the withered branches of the vine, to the fire of divine wrath, which they have already kindled, as if that wrath did not burn hot enough already. Or putting the branch to the nose may signify the giving of a very great affront and provocation either to God or man. They are an abusive generation of men. Note on verses 13 to 18. God states that in the time of punishment he will not spare these leaders, even though they cry aloud for help. We must all reject false worship, yet that is not the only point here. The lesson of this chapter becomes clearer when we examine the next chapters in this section. They show the glory of God departing from the temple because of such abominable practices and attitudes. God's Spirit leaves when people turn away from Him. He remains only where He is welcome and is obeyed. This is true of nations, church organizations, and individuals. And when He leaves, judgment follows. End.